Blog Talk Radio.
G'day, Mookie. Are you there, mate?
Yes, mate. Thank you.
Oh, gee, it's so great. I'm glad everybody is back with us and continuing on with our show. Yeah. And yeah, I'm always reminded of sort of a time, it's like sort of milk and cookies, isn't it? Sort of. And it's a time just to lay back and on the mat sort of thing, after milk and cookies sort of thing, and listening into a story, which really is a long time ago, of course, but now, of course, as well. Yeah. But it's so amazing, actually, that the people of the Ancient Ones, they did a lot of story and they did pictograms and things, and they left sort of woven ceremonial sort of cloth and things behind. And in the weaving of that, the person that was weaving it, they were instructed in a story of creation. And then, of course, this story, which we've been talking about, really sort of centers around I awareness and what it means to be being in balance and being a balanced person, in life, But it's so amazing that, you've got all these pictures of birds and animals and that sort of thing, and it's amazing also too, of course, the Nagual represents the awakener in English, I guess you could say, in the direct translation. And Cloud would talk about the Nama, and the Na sort of represented this sort of vacuumed vortex of space, and Ma represented this sort of unformed primordial strings that filled the space invisibly like water. So the weaver was taught how to teach a story by using a pictogram and things, and this was their language. But this Nama that Cloud talked about, Na represented sort of this vacuum space, and Ma represented the primordial strings that filled this space around, as in I and am. And then, of course, these two elements sort of create a harmonics in the waves, and Ma is this body, or am, or me is this body, Ma, allowing us to be able to perceive. And Nu is I, as Ma represented the body, of course, and represented God sort of as I am. And this invisible body, you have applied light to arrive here, and that this the shape that arrived here first is the shape of a fish, of course, because in this story, the fish is got a shape to it which can rush, of course, as fast up a waterfall as water is going down it. And a fish can swim up just as fast as the water is flowing down. And, of course, the shape of the fish swims itself to be present here, you know. So it's quite amazing, but this is really a beautiful story, sharing with people in pictograms, sort of 4 dimensions and 3-dimensional form, ways for people to be able to perceive what's sort of more invisible before finally Poe sort of happens, which sort of, I guess that's a proton in English, and then atoms and everything that we can see around us sort of is made from this. Yeah, so it's sort of a story that is really goes back, you know, in time, really. Yeah. Are you with me, mate?
Wow, yeah. Amazing. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, you know, a body in colloidal biology, you know, is tuned, you know, to produce sort of beautiful harmonic wave transforms. And this can be seen in many ways, of course, and certainly the Native American shaman was really trained to be able to perceive things more in the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums. But this uniform dimensional biomatrix, you know, really is represented by our red blood corpuscle. And then if alcohol would have got in there or something else, it can have taken the forces that's carried by the blood, which is more the ego, whereas these forces, which we're talking about more, is carried by the bones and the more solid parts of ourself, which is more your sense of your governing sense of yourself. And then if something else got into the blood, it can have affected the that component of ourself, you see. But the red blood corpuscle is resonated to a high spin frequency with the heart's percussion, and then that travels throughout the blood vessels and things in the body. And, of course, the heart is the most powerful electrical organ in our body. And there's an energy that's equivalent to the mass harmonic at the heart sort of center light field, and that is really imbued sort of biophotonically as a property. And then this is imbued, of course, in the red blood corpuscle. And then there is a beautiful geometric structure, of course, within this, which we could learn about more. But that could be another program. But the heart sort of has these 4 chambers, and it levitates, of course, the red blood corpuscle within itself and through scalar waves incurred, and that creates sort of dimples and stretches space, a little bit like the shape of a mouth or a flying saucer, where the edges are sort of pinched and it sort of bulges in the center more and then dimpled. And then just like a red blood corpuscle in a way, there's shapes that affect everything, and then these shapes certainly are shapes which have an anti-gravity property of themselves. But these, you could say, a dimple or expansion and contraction of the fabric of space causes then things to fall into this more, you see. But as the body sort of within its Schumann resonance, it's our longitudinal energy patterns flow and are flowing best, and that happens to be at night more when the sun is disappeared, and then the collection points become more apparent. And this could be explained because it's a sort of a negative polar reversal that occurs when you sleep, but then that's another story too. But this involves sort of hemisphere synchronization, what we're talking about, as the space is being expanded. And then certainly a straw, as we've been talking about, could have become embedded in a steel of glass, you know, or steel or glass, and you can see it right there. And this is the consciousness, really, you know, of the shaman. But then we just left off our program. We were talking about words, how they relate to our senses, and the Nagual was someone amongst us who would teach the initiate ever more deeply how to apply whole body calibration and observing of body movement, body part movement, like proprioception and tactile and visceral senses, and they would be very aware of visual sense and auditory sense and vomeronasal sense and vestibular sense. These are all unique senses that the medicine person is taught, and that this is their school or their university, if you could call it this. But it's sort of a place where people are voting with their feet. But anyway, life is sort of like a confluence of this multiple vibration. And of course, in another program, we were talking about going forward, back, up, down, in relating to a whole body movements. And those are vestibular words, just like to see is a visual word, or the sound of the words we're using is auditory, and going and getting and having sort of kinesthetic catch-all sort of words. Words we use can relate to the senses we're using, and all stuck states would have occurred because there would have been a sensory system deletion. But consciousness sort of was likened a little bit like a light that was able to be put on, and you could use this to show others the way, but then perhaps all you could see was where the light was and not where it wasn't, you see, and only if it was on and you couldn't see anything when it wasn't. But this is set and all a very deep insight into things that are occurring more in the unseen world, and that was called the setting sun, and sat and say term, and it came from setting sun really, and the invisible forces that exist, which is part of I and am. So astrophysics sort of the Toltecs really explained this binary system that we live in the patterns of garments and cloths, very ceremonial cloths and things that they wove, and that most of the solar system is binary. And I think when I first heard this, I mean, I got one of these garments given to me after I'd been on the road with cloud some period. Then I started running all the entheogenic ceremonies, which I did about a couple thousand of those up until 2004. But this, most of the solar system sort of is explained, of course, is a binary system, and in this binary, and that explains the binary nature that's existing in matter that we see around us, where everything is sort of in pairs, and antimatter and matter pairs, and that this, after a certain sort of energetic lapse, matter forms into these pairs generally, because this is sort of what a polar completeness is about, and this is I am. So all is composed really, the natives talk about in sort of little strings, which I've seen under the microscope, of course, and that makes the base colloidal biology, which when I first heard about this, it was just sort of mind-blowing to me, and it just had caused me to really have been embarked on the teachings which I have been ever since, you know. But all these composed strings of matter vibrate, as we talk about in colloidal biology and secrets of an alkaline body and Judd's cell rejuvenation, and in other places in the net. But where matter is sort of like a whirlpool, and you can see it sort of like a dust devil or something, whilst it sort of has got its energy, it can hold the parts of itself, you can see it together, and it even does everything it can to sustain itself. It will go where it can sustain itself and things. But, and sort of it can be satisfying sort of descriptions of life. But a whirlpool centered around a suction or implosion. And these strings come together to make a membrane in colloidal biology. And this occurs by an aggregating, fusing, and differentiating process to make a plasma, to make a membrane. And this is all on an invisible level before it makes an atom, but this is the very fabric which makes an atom. And the Toltecs sort of teach of a sound given to this, which sort of then animates things which you could see in front of you. But before the moment of the sound, of course, it looks still, but the moment you're giving it the ability to have sound, it's starting to dance around in front of you more. But the Toltec teaching of sound and picture relation and words used, of course, Tarshish cloud taught us represented Wankan as representative here, and Tankashila is the derivative sound we use today in Native America that represents Christ-like energy here on the earth amongst us, Tankashila. And this sound describes this orderly sort of born energetics of being in this time. From these forces of this time is for the native originals here. And this Atlanteans and others. And this also means an ocean voyager, of course, also, as we've talked about in other programs. But Wankan Tonka simply means parent, and this was their word for God. And that neither meant male nor female. It was a component completeness, Wankan Tonka. Wonka comes from the Waka time in the connectedness of Atlanteans when they were in the Minoan era. And this is a word which is used in Atlantean times, which means simply great. And Tank means uplifted. And Tunk and Ton, and all these words sort of all are related in our mother tongue, but Wankan Tonka simply means parent, and all explained sort of previously as sort of absolute evidence of an Atlantean influence spiritually here in Native America. But the Toltec Indians teach a very similar civic sort of cultural tradition as the other Atlantean colonies had, and certainly in their teaching of people about a republic, having a republic and democracy functioning as a republic, as chiefdoms are set where the people are in the growth of the resource that exists. And so this, in the golden age, which Cloud talks about, which our story gets into a bit, but the Toltec Indian teaching really does have similar civic sort of cultural teachings as we're talking, and other Atlantean colonies certainly do too, and it's got amazing astronomical insight parallels, with ancient Africa and Egypt, and very similar mythology and teaching of eye awareness through mystery schools that colonized back through all this period of time, certainly with going back at least several thousand years and even some before this, which is more a whole cosmology, of more of the newer religions at least that are newer than 4,000 years old. Certainly intellectuals would tell you that are not a full cosmology today at all. But things that are older certainly are, because they include more the animals and the atoms and everything around us, and explain our creation through sound and words and picture form. Yes, and so this is what the Atlanteans did, quite a bit. But the Toltec shaman tradition really is highly reflective, priests and monks, as we've talked about, and traditions and concepts and methods. Certainly is not incidental. No one could say that it's not incidental Occidental, nor to ever sort of really ever more ancient Amazi in Africa, inhabiting certainly the Midland Plains, having similar sorts of words and language and ideas, and this predates Atlanteans taking over again the Nile and building there again, and thousands of years. We're talking about thousands of years earlier. See, yet this is sort of another story. But the Toltec teach a deep science of the structure of matter and intelligence imbued within, and one can really learn a lot from this. Shila Washte means the level of water rising, or the sort of great collective force very deep inside, and they called our ability and state of being that we could access to do remote viewing and things, a state called hollow bones. And this causes light to orbit on this invisible level according to sort of cardinal points of the medicine wheel that has sort of an actual 8 quadrant and various sort of parallels with quantum mechanics. And so colour was used to cause things to come toward a person, and colour was used to project things away, and this sort of thing, and masks and things were used, and cloth and things were used. And I learned a lot how to make medicines and then apply light to cause people to have a treatment like for cancer that could last about 3 months or more, which I was doing back then. But and then perhaps I can get to again in another day. But I is taught sort of as an incurred sort of open space between the middle of a figure-8 shape and this neutral zone of a nothingness, sort of all cosmic light sort of falls further into, and this sort of happens all around us in a great sort of a manner of harmonics, or sort of like a phased manner, and transitions occur in this invisible water as an ether, making up matter that you can see around us, and the fabric of the particles which make up electrons and protons. And the Toltec teach that when everyone else's sort of mind is sluggish, of course, this really is very much sort of the hour of the shaman. And our binary solar system has most of the matter come to us in pairs as we're talking, and no matter how fast light actually moves, this is a constant relative to our human sort of visual perception, and this is what Cloud teaches and the Toltecs, which could correct a lot of things in physics if they could be understanding of this, because otherwise it's sort of crazy, Einstein's laws. But if you can follow what this is, which we're talking about here, and understand scalar, then you're really fully being able to put all of Einstein more together. But this constant sort of is relative to human visual perception involving resonance, and if perception was really only time sort of by distance, a human's neurology could really detect certainly what's visible, but certainly not what's invisible. But what could we be felt of or heard or seen, and that awareness that we are talking about here now is going beyond what people can see or have heard or have felt before, you see. But not what a human's neurology really is capable of perceiving, except through more eye awareness as we go through this program. But this scientific structure of I am, it really starts out sort of being composed of unformed strings in colloidal biology, which I do advise people to learn more about colloidal biology, because that's an absolute total scientific fact. And if you're not into colloidal biology yet, you are not into this brand new insight into biology. But as it goes to perception of am, you see, am is then perception, you see. I is sort of this awareness, and am is sensory. And I is this empty space, and am becomes these scalar waves that incur as a result of the vacuum that's present, and there's eddies meaning spaces and pressure points that exist. And as sound is put to this, you've got scalar wave technology, which then can cause like a fungus which looks to be seemingly inanimate, all of a sudden come alive and strangle sort of something right before your very eyes, under the microscope. But you've got fungus growing certainly in space and mold and things. But as the scalar wave occurs with an actually fractal interaction of strings in space form membranes, and these becomes cosmic light or ether that people talk about, this is what will pass right through any Faraday cage. You can double up the Faraday cages and it's going to pass right through, so it's not electromagnetic at all. And then this is expressed sort of in this third-dimensional matter. So before matter sort of forms, these vibrating threads are expressed in harmonics of several harmonics, which represent the musical scale of notes that we can see in the rainbow. Claire will talk about this. And that finally expressed as matter is this third-dimensional stuff you can see around us. And it's because these seven rays are broken by an eighth ray, which pierces these seven rays of harmonics, and it causes crystallization and things to slow down, and M forms, where we can get a bit more solid perception of our galaxy and ourselves, and we can sort of become more sort of reflective of things. And these shapes give us the ability to do this. And then light remains constant, of course, to perception because of neurology. And, of course, it's not doesn't just stop at 786 miles per second. It just doesn't stop at that speed of light at all. That's just our constant because of our resonance, because of our structure that we're made of. And this explains something which, Einstein was really trying to figure it out. But not all forces sort of really opened up even in this third dimension, and yet they do exist in this enfolded space, in this Fibonacci fractal. And the shape of an inverted egg sort of floats no matter how heavy. You can get the heaviest substance like mercury or something, and you can just put this into water, and you can get it to float in water by just spinning the water. But this cloud points out is the shape of the universe, and this is the forces that we have around us. And when that gets cracked, that egg shape, you've got sort of an enormous amount of vortexes which is within it, broken loose, you see, which we can see around us, sort of scattered just a bit like clay pots of glowing orbs, which slowly cool and end up with a crust, sort of. And these get born in this nebulae. But this the Toltec tradition of I, which is everything in the universe is flowing inside I as self, as I am. And the Toltec tradition of I is made up of these unformed waves as the eternal space within itself, as am is formed from this small sort of crystallization of matter. And as movement and vibrational masses occurred as a result of sound and sonics, you've got an incurredness of a unified resonance occurring, and Fibonacci fractals and string intersections of pressure and eddies and membranes form, you see, into this cosmic photons. And then this is the fabric cloth, the very cloth that's woven in three different sorts of stitches, which we could talk a bit about, to talk about behavior, that protons and neutrons and electrons and atoms sort of made of. And then you've got these are aggregated, and fused and differentiated into matter and life that we can see around us from this cosmic sort of photon soup. Yeah. But the initiate was trained to go into the invisible realm, and then some people I know, I led over a couple thousand entheogenic ceremonies, and I know some people that did at least 200 or 300 or 400, but they participated over some period of time, and then the journey is in the beginning. People are not necessarily initiated into the full essence of everything, but slowly this becomes more unfolded, you see. But the Toltec teaching and other sort of Atlantean teachings, as we're talking about here, have influenced culture as we really know it. And certainly the Dogon is a counterpart to what we're talking about here in Native America, and they have very definite paths, as the natives do here, and basics in science. We're only just sort of relearning this now with string theory and this sort of thing, and a lot of this is making sense. But a cosmological piece of art just sort of left behind might not seem like anything to a normal eye, but the trained eye could then be observed to see things, certainly, that you've had a teacher such as Cloud, as I have, you see. But enacted out of the rituals and ceremonies cause the participants to have a very beautiful increased knowledge more of the associated sort of symbolism that exists. And then it was sort of a rare thing that someone would be a great orator to story tell this and yet sort of have a very deep, great awareness of it, but that could take some time, certainly, to develop this, but that questions then you would be asked in this sort of bardo state. You could recollect anything that anybody asked you, the date of times and events and people around this person. Everything would be imbued right there, you see. And that perhaps we can get into this a little bit more, in this program when we talk about implicit and explicit mind reading techniques. But Cloud showed me sort of Seminole Creek Indian sort of patterning and the story of the universe being an egg, and that this is sort of an inverted cone, and as it's sort of like an event horizon, even as a black hole is being explained now, you see. And that this egg shape floats in this spinning water. And, of course, for people who are concerned that, they look up at the sun and the moon and these organs of ourselves, and they're not seemingly connected to us, but they certainly are staying put where they are, aren't they? Isn't that amazing? They haven't fallen down yet. But people, Cloud said, are still looking to see if they have fallen at all. And that's the story of Henny Penny, which is a pretty old story. But, you think if you could see even something very heavy like this sort of spinning, but it becomes buoyant. And certainly the universe is an egg cracked, as you could see this, and then the release of all these spinning vortexes that you could see within the shape that's existing. This shape exists so that the only way to keep something fresh, which the ancient Atlanteans taught the Japanese to make these vessels. Japan means many layers in the Atlantean Lemurian New tongue. But that's another story as well, which eventually we should get back and deeper and go further beyond and get into 50,000 years ago. But anyway, that's another story. But the universal egg cracked and released, and these spinning vortexes from inside the egg, and these follow a Fibonacci scattering, throwing out of pellets, sort of a primordial cosmic matter in all the directions. And our sun, sort of being such a pellet, surrounded itself by these spiraling orbs which have cooled to varying degrees, and some have dynamo, so then they generate their own heat, and some are sort of dead like the moon is at the moment. But because of things that have occurred to it. But with these 8 folded turns, within, Cloud told me that the whole universe, of course, in Wonka is based on this binary system of pairs, and this flawed union occurred as one body is without its sort of twin that incurs a breach, you see, a cosmic impact, certainly, and created radical impacts on society and life and biology's progression, and how water really is assisted to fertilize and the seemingly inanimate by its perfect sort of binary twin nature, which eventually sort of will get to how life arose here on Earth and panspermia. But behaviour sort of counterparts exist, certainly, that we're talking about here, that respond to offers. For instance, if we could consider things to be like this as when something is given, then you could be felt of this as an offer, couldn't you? And the Toltecs taught their medicine people to consider that there would be like only 4 sort of ways a person could really respond, and 3 real only ways you could really respond actually. But these have behavioural counterparts that exist in subatomic energetics. And then you could accept, of course, and this is gravity drawing things together, bringing things in, or that you could accept with some condition, because as you bring things in, the conditioning of things spinning like an ant, not just travelling in a straight line, but going round and round and round the line that it walked on, it's spinning itself. And that spinning is a conditioning, because you could accept something with conditions, and that's the second thing you can do. Because you could first accept, then if you could accept something with condition, which is this electromagnetic field, and then this is accepting with condition, of course, the spinning energetics surrounding this sort of electromagnetics. Otherwise, then you could just sort of bow your head, you could fall silent, and you could be just allowing of what is existing, because there's a force which holds likeness together, which is this sort of a weak nuclear force, which physicists do talk about. Or you then have a force, if this doesn't exist, which is sort of rejecting. And that's the fourth force that we have, and fourth choice that we have in behaviour, which we'll go over these so we could learn a little bit more about all of this, But I'm going through things just because I think it's possible that you can continue to listen back through all of this to get more of a sequence of everything yourself, and then people would have to come to a Yawipi ceremony or a sweat lodge or another sort of ceremony, and then learn some of these things. But it was only the inner family more that would learn this. But corresponding quantum mechanics has behavioural correlates, Lukey, including gravity, bringing things together, electromagnetic conditions, weak nuclear force, of course, allowingness, and then a strong nuclear force which really does push everything apart, and it's sort of keeping things slightly apart, even though something which is a weak nuclear force holding things together. But these physical conditions and correlates have componentry in our behaviour, which we will talk about, but is embedded really in consciousness and in the native Toltec teaching. And then the mythical sort of tiny thread, which we talk about in colloidal biology, they talk about also as woven in 3 primary ways. And then these primary ways of weaving things mythologically, the spider ectomy, there are 7 wraps up the dimensions and notes and colours of the rainbow is enfolded within these strings that are woven by ectomy, which is sort of represented by a spider and 8 legs, It is interesting. We could talk a bit about how they've crossed a spider and a goat to make a very, very tough substance. But anyway, using a similar insight as the Atlanteans, which we're talking about here. But these strings are woven together to have matter as we know it. 7 rays of light, and increasing the length represent sort of the 7 stars as stringed loops that we can see we evolve around as the Pleiades. But introducing sort of physiological concepts and cosmological insight, because what we see above us explains what we have below, and what's below explains what's above quite a bit. And introducing physiological concepts and cosmological concepts could take sort of a bit of time, but the apprentice, certainly in this, how you're doing things with us together here, getting this information out to people and then making this available, it's possible to use picture form and things to assist to help this story. But the number 7 and the number 8 is really component storyline sort of numbers in this constructive sort of validity, emphasizing sort of related concepts of matter's formation. Of course, 7 really is the stars that we have that we're evolving around, and these 7 rays of light that we can see through affecting our perception and matter's formation where we are. But the Dogon, the Mayan, the Egyptian, the Buddhists, all of these people have very deep emphasis on geometric shape, which I just had a very, very amazing teacher a long time ago, a long time ago,